Hello everyone, my name is Daria, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about Zoya Nazyalensky and her portrayal in the show versus the trilogy. I'll be honest and upfront with you guys that I'm gonna be a little bit petty and a little bit nitpicky in this video because Zoya Nazyalensky is my favorite character in the entire Grishaverse. I have a very severe attachment to her, which makes me very sensitive to the changes that were made to her character in the show, and I have some criticisms. So let's talk about Zoya's general character arc in the Grisha trilogy and beyond. When we first meet Zoya in Shadow and Bone, she comes off as a very one-dimensional character. She is the stereotypical pretty mean girl. And that is really all we get from her in book one. And then, slowly but surely, with every single book that we read, we get to learn more about her character. We get to dive deeper and realize that she's not just this cardboard cutout of the mean girl archetype. She has layers, as any person does. And that is so rarely afforded to characters like her. And seeing Zoya's trajectory from where she is in Shadow and Bone to where she ends up in Rule of Wolves, it was one of the most satisfying character arcs I have ever read. Now, as I mentioned, Zoya is really only defined by her jealousy of Alina, her beauty, and her general pettiness and mean spirit in the first book. And of course, the argument can be made that show Zoya hits those same character beats. But I believe there were certain additions to her character and her dialogue that made me a little bit upset as a Zoya stan. So of course, let's break it down. We're pretty much going to be going scene by scene of Zoya in the show because she's not in there a lot. First, let's talk about Zoya Propositioning Mal in the show. I was a little bit shocked that they went ahead and were this bold this early on in the show, because in the first book, there's really only some glances shared between Mal and Zoya. But us book readers know that, of course, in Siege and Storm, it goes beyond just looking at each other. Zoya Propositioning Mal in that moment, it was more to introduce her character, but also to establish that Mal is always going to choose Alina over any other person, any other woman in particular. And I'm not mad at the scene. I think the only time that it would become an issue is if they follow Mal and Zoya's storyline in the second book. It just is not going to make a lot of sense given that he already turned her down in the first season. It is not a problem that Zoya desires sex, that she's a sexual being. The problem I have is that the writers made that pretty much her only personality trait. For example, the fight scene between Zoya and Alina in the books, there is no mention of Mal at all. That is not something that Zoya uses to agitate Alina, but in the show, it is.
Your tracker friend also liked it when I put him on his back.
Zoya insinuates that she and Mal have slept together and uses that to get under Alina's skin. And it could just be seen as a throwaway line she's trying to get in Alina's head, but why bring up Mal in order to do that? You could just take a jab at her for not being good at fighting, for being the sun summoner, yet not knowing how to use her powers. Why bring up Mal in that sexually explicit way? I don't really have a problem with this dialogue on its own, but once again, you have to look at the broader context of Zoya constantly saying these sexual things, and that pretty much being the only driving factor in her life. And finally, we're gonna get to the most egregious example of this, and something that just really pissed me off. And that is her scene with the Darkling in his bedroom.
Your table was messy and your bed was neat. I'd help you make it the other way around. Let yourself relax.
Now, in the books, it is never explicitly stated that Zoya and the Darkling slept together or have any romantic relationship. In my mind, at least, I saw Zoya's relationship with the Darkling as her having this almost icon, godlike admiration for him. And this feeling of admiration, this willingness to do anything the Darkling asks of you, is not specific to Zoya only. All the Grisha felt that way. He was their savior. Genya mentions in the book that if the Darkling had propositioned her, she would absolutely sleep with him. So when you add together the scene with the Darkling, with her saying that explicit comment about Mal, paired with her propositioning Mal, it sort of just seems like the only drive that Zoya has is sex. Her hatred for Alina is entirely driven because Alina is the Darkling's new romantic conquest and interest. In my opinion, in the books, Zoya was more upset of Alina's power, the fact that the Darkling saw something in her and valued her and her powers more than he did Zoya. Knowing what we know about Zoya and her past, for those of us who have read King of Scars and even Rule of Wolves, we know that Zoya desires power, that she wants to be and feel powerful, that she wants to be feared by others. So, to have Alina come along and take her position as the most powerful Grisha in the army, as the Darkling's right-hand woman, that messes with her. That pisses her off. But in the show, they frame it as purely romantic jealousy. So I wanted to hop on here and further prove my point that everything related to Zoya's motivation is about her having romantic jealousy. In the book, Zoya says before the fight with Alina, surely the Sun Summoner doesn't need my help, basically insinuating that Alina, as the Sun Summoner, should know how to hold her own in a fight. And later, when she uses her powers on Alina and gets in trouble, Nadia and Marie say that she can't handle the fact that she's not the Darkling's favorite anymore. And they specifically say, Zoya's powerful, but she's just another squaller, you're the Sun Summoner. So basically, we get the idea that Zoya wants to knock Alina down a peg or two. She doesn't like the idea of someone else being more powerful than her. So Alina poses a threat to her status within the Second Army. Whereas in the show,
She's just jealous. Can't bear the idea of anyone else being favoured by General Kerrigan. I don't know why she wastes her time pining over him when she could be with me.
Nadia's comment about Zoya pining after the Darkling basically sets it up so that Zoya has no motivation for being angry at Alina besides romantic jealousy, which is just very one-dimensional. The next thing I want to discuss is Zoya's racist comment towards Alina. Now, in the books, Zoya goes up to hug Alina and she tells her, "You stink of Karemzin." It's an extremely rude comment, it's incredibly elitist, and in the show, she basically says the same thing, except she adds,
"You stink of the orphanage, half-breeds."
Now, I know there's been a lot of debate over the portrayals of anti-Shu racism in Shadow and Bone, and I am most definitely not an authority on that at all. The comment of half-breed just seemed incredibly unnecessary in my opinion. You stink of Karemzin, you stink of the orphanage is hurtful enough. We're about to move into King of Scars and Rule of Wolves spoilers, so hop off if you don't want to hear that. Readers of that duology know that Zoya is actually half Suli, and she has been passing ever since she has gone to the Little Palace. Zoya carries a lot of guilt and shame and deals with internalized racism, and I've seen it argued that her calling Alina a half-breed is that internalized racism rearing its ugly head. And you know, I can understand that argument, but I think there are so many better ways that you could show that struggle within Zoya without her having to make that comment. For example, in the King of Scars duology, we see her never speaking Suli. She actively chooses not to speak that language, although she speaks so many others. We see her pointedly ignore other Suli people, not associate with them, and create a barrier between that community and herself. I feel like those are much more interesting ways of getting across that internalized struggle than her just making a racist comment to Alina. And what makes this comment even more confusing and unnecessary is that attempt at redemption that the writers put in later in the show. When Zoya is entering the Winter Fate, she overhears a woman saying,
"I didn't know this Emily had such talent."
And she corrects her and says,
"She's Suli."
And this is meant to be a really powerful moment. This is the first time that we're seeing Zoya back after she left the palace, or I guess you could say was ordered out of the palace. Once again, there's no point. Like, why did you have her say half-breed? I don't understand it. I really don't. The last thing I want to bring up, and probably the biggest mistake that I think the writers made with Zoya's character, was the revelation that her family lives in Novosibirsk. In the second Grisha trilogy book, Siege and Storm, there is this running question in Alina and the readers' minds of why Zoya decided to side with Alina. She was so dedicated to the Darkling. What could have possibly changed her mind? Where do her loyalties actually lie? And then we find out, and our perception of Zoya entirely changes. Zoya, in the heat of the moment, tells Alina that she had an aunt in Novosibirsk, and that aunt obviously died when the Darkling destroyed the city, and she will never forgive him for that. This man that she revered, this man that she looked up to, callously took the lives of the people who mean the most to her. I know for me, it was such a shocking revelation, and immediately when I read that, I thought, this girl, something is going on with her. Something really interesting is going on underneath that facade of coldness that she has. I want to dig deeper. I want to know what's going on with her. And the writers absolutely dropped the ball with this revelation. It felt like a throwaway comment that Zoya said on that skiff. There's no tension, no questioning, no buildup like there was to Siege and Storm. When Zoya admits her reason for turning against the Darkling in the second book, it is this huge shock. But in the show, it was nothing.
Whatever gets us to Novosibirsk. As soon as we land, I'm going straight to see my aunt. That's why I volunteered to drive the skiffs, to see them.
I hated the fact that she switched alliances seemingly easily on that boat. That revelation is the starting point of us peeling back the layers of Zoya Nazyalensky. And the fact that Lee dragged out that development, that we get little kernels of who she is throughout the books, that is what makes the ending of her arc in Rule of Wolves so satisfying. So for the writers to just rush through it is such a detriment to Zoya. It feels like an insult. It feels like a personal affront to me as a human being. Anyway, those are my very complex thoughts on how I feel about Zoya's portrayal in the show. I love Zoya. I love Sujaya as well. I really hope that they give her more to dig into in the next season because Zoya is such a complex character. She is such a fascinating character. And so far, I feel like they aren't showing those complexities and those nuances. Given that the writers are pressing fast forward on Zoya's arc, I wonder if the introduction of Nikolai next season will also be the beginning of their romance. Maybe they're going to completely skip the part where he likes Alina and proposes to her. And honestly, I am like the biggest Zoya stan to ever exist, but I would be very disappointed if they just skipped straight to a Nikolai-Zoya romance. I'll still eat it up, obviously, because it's Zoya, but like, I will be disappointed. So that is it for me today, you guys. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment down below. Let me know what you guys thought of Zoya's portrayal in the show. Let me know if I'm making too big a deal out of this. That honestly might be true. I'm just very attached to this woman, so even these small changes that they made, I felt like had a really big impact on her overall arc and character. If you guys want to find me or follow me anywhere else on social media, all the links will be down below. I love you all very dearly, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video. Bye!